With us now is David McLaughlin, former Chief of Staff to Brian Mulroney. David, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Your thoughts on Ford saying stick with the dollar-for-dollar tariffs. Is that the right approach?
Well, it shows the challenge facing the Prime Minister and facing the Canadian government right now. I mean, that was the position that everybody took in the early days, you know, elbows up, all that kind of stuff. And so Canadians were very much in that kind of retaliatory tit-for-tat sort of dynamic. But as this has dragged on with no obvious resolution in sight, you know, some of that determination is flagging a bit. And we saw in the early days, not every premier was there. Premier Smith of Alberta, Premier Moe of Saskatchewan, where, you know, they kind of ambiguous a bit ambivalent rather on whether or not we should do dollar for dollar. Doug Ford has been quite consistent throughout, but you know, we'll see if whether or not that is actually in fact the position of the Canadian government going forward. In the just remind us, in the last retaliatory round, which is the U.S. retaliating against us for not, you know, having a deal. We did not, you know, raise tariffs in retaliation. So we're kind of in between for now.
How do you think the U.S. will react to A, Ford's comments, and B, if we do back off on tariffs or step back a little bit, will they perceive that as weak, or will they perceive that as us looking for a deal?
Well, I mean, who knows what goes on in Donald Trump's mind? I mean, that's really the challenge here. You know, what is the pathway to some kind of negotiated settlement? I mean, you know, Trump just today raised tariffs on India for something completely different, for selling oil to Russia. You know, in the case of the Russia and Ukraine dynamic, it has nothing to do with trade and the bilateral economic relationship between India and the United States. So Trump gets into these kinds of views, these dynamics, and you know, brings things out of thin air. So we don't really know. But you know, my sense would be that the government will continue to stand firm for now, probably not raise you know, tariffs across the board in some cases. In fact, the Prime Minister is talking about actually reducing here and there for, you know, for some you know, to manage the sectoral pain on these. So I think sort of holding the line until we actually see whether or not the U.S. is is prepared to negotiate a deal. I think that's really the bigger question at this stage.
And just one last question: Carney has two big meetings today, cabinet and with the premiers. What is he saying to both groups?
I think he's giving them an update and telling them the state of play. I mean, the Prime Minister has been very good at keeping, you know, his own government informed on stuff. He needs to have that political support around him. And, of course, the other key players are the Premier. So he's been very good at keeping them informed. I think that's what it is. He'll hear the views and take the temperature on that. But I think what we saw last week was really the dynamics between Canada and the U.S. sort of, they're in the kind of limbo. There was no great sort of demise. It was just sort of, you know, kind of petered out. So we're still in a bit of a holding pattern. And as long as we're in a holding pattern, I think the government will hold off on final decisions.
Okay. David, thank you for your insight. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
David McLaughlin is the former Chief of Staff to Brian Mulroney.